Part 45. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 441. At this time, after seeing the scene in the distance, Lin Yu's eyes also evoke some complicated colors. At this time, he couldn't help but frown slightly, and then he squinted like this. Eyes opened. It's strange. This woman is really strange, but I can't quite tell which part is strange. Lin Yu was talking leisurely like this, and at this time, a bit of solemnity flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows. Just when Scar was about to walk in front of the woman suddenly moved. She pulled out a knife from her waist, and then she suddenly pointed it towards Scar. The edge stabbed straight through. At this time, Scar was not completely fascinated by this woman, but had taken some precautions in advance. He knew that it was certainly unlikely that this woman would obey him so easily. Scar has been afraid of being deceived over the years, so he made some preparations in advance. And at this moment, as expected, the woman suddenly stabbed Scar's body directly. At this time, a bit of gloom flashed in Scar's eyes, and he just grabbed him directly. Captured the woman's wrist. At this time, Scar's face showed a cold light, and in the corners of his eyes and brows, there was completely a gloomy murderous intention. Smelly woman, I know you don't have any good intentions. Well, since you want to kill me, don't blame me for being rude to you. Scar said in a cold voice. And at this moment, a sneer appeared at the corner of the woman's mouth. At this moment, the woman's face was quite gloomy, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. Okay, if you can, kill me. If you don't kill me, I will look down on you. There was quite a bit of unwillingness in the woman's eyes, and at this time, after Scar saw such a beautiful face of the woman, the evil thoughts in his heart became more and more obvious. At this time, Scar gently lifted the woman's chin, with a slight sneer on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of ridicule in his eyes. The little beauty was born so beautiful, how could I be willing to kill the little beauty? Today I decided to have some fun with the little beauty. Scar's eyes were fixed directly on the woman. At this time, the sneer at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. After the woman saw Scar like this, she suddenly felt a bit of an ominous premonition in her heart. At this time, her eyes were fixed on Scar's body, and her brows seemed to be knitted together. What do you want to do? I'm warning you, if you dare to mess around, if you dare to mess around. At this time, the women were already a little incoherent. At this time, Scar suddenly smiled. He stared at the woman with a smile on his face, and a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes. If I dare to mess around, what can you do? Sample. At this moment, Scar suddenly laughed like this, and a cold light flashed in the woman's eyes. If you dare to mess around, I will definitely stretch your muscles and skin you. At this time, Scar rounded up his palm after hearing what the woman said, and slapped the woman on the face without saying a word. I don't know who gave you the courage to talk to me like this. Since you want to seek death, then let the brothers have fun first, and then I will naturally send you to the west. Scar laughed like this after he finished speaking. After everyone heard what Scar said, their eyes turned towards the woman at the same time. At this time, there was quite a bit of greed in their eyes. They were looking at this woman like she was looking at a piece of cargo. Their eyes were vaguely disgusting. After seeing this scene, the woman at this moment was quite frightened, so she subconsciously took a few steps back. You guys, don't come here, stay away from me, stay away from me, get out of here, get out of here. By the end, the woman's voice was even a bit hysterical. But for these bastards, the louder a woman shouts, the more exciting it is for them. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't stand it anymore. So at this time, Lin Yu jumped down, and then slowly walked towards them. Come over. Oh, if you don't teach me, I originally didn't want to meddle in this business, but you said that even I can't stand what you are doing, so I can only help this girl. Lin Yu just said this unhurriedly, and at this time, he slowly walked towards everyone. After everyone saw Lin Yu like this, their expressions were like this, and they suddenly frowned, with a bit of gloominess flashing in their eyes. I'm warning you, kid, you'd better not meddle in other people's business, otherwise, don't blame me for being rude to you. Scar stood up and walked towards Lin Yu slowly, while the rest of his group of brothers controlled the woman directly. After hearing what Scar said, Lin Yu laughed loudly. At this time, his eyes were full of mockery, and then he frowned slightly. Mind your business. You are right. What I like most is minding my business. And I tell you, if you let me take care of this matter today, I will do it. If you don't let me take care of it, I will do it. Lin Yu nailed Scar with a smile on his face. At this time, Scar showed a cold light on his face after hearing what Lin Yu said, and then he directly pulled out a long knife from behind him and rushed towards Lin Yu. At this time, Scar held the long knife in both hands and wanted to kill Lin Yu with one knife. But in fact he had a backup plan. The little black snake swam towards Lin Yu frantically along the sand. The speed of the little black snake was so fast that it was under Lin Yu's feet in an instant. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 442. At this time, Lin Yu was of course aware of the existence of this little black snake. At this moment, there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and then he shook his head. I didn't expect it, I didn't expect it. Even though I'm not very strong at this, my dirty tricks are quite good. This is really something I didn't expect. Lin Yu was talking unhurriedly, and at this moment, Scar looked at the mysterious snake, getting closer and closer to Lin Yu, and the smile on his face began to become more and more ferocious. A ferocious smile appeared at the corner of Scar's mouth, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the murderous intention in his body suddenly emerged. Boy, I wonder if you are still alive today. And just when the mysterious snake broke out of the sand and wanted to bite Lin Yu suddenly stepped forward, and then the energy in his whole body surged out in an instant. That surging force completely crushed the mysterious snake. This Xianming snake is just a little lord-level snake. It is not even a domain lord. But the scary thing about it is that its poison can even release an epic-level alien beast. Fall. Moreover, this Xianming snake possesses the bloodline of ancient poisonous snakes. Once the ancient bloodline is stimulated, the terrifying nature will be self-evident. Therefore, this is the preciousness of this Xianming snake. But even Scar never expected that Lin Yu could kill the mysterious snake so easily. At this time, Scar's face showed a kind of purple color. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Scar's mouth, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, with a hint of coldness flashing in his eyes. You. At this time, Scar was a little incoherent and speechless. At this time, Lin Yu turned his head towards Scar, just glanced coldly, and the corners of his mouth were even more rosy. Yuruao smiled, and a bit of mockery flashed in his eyes. What do I mean by me? What do you mean by you? You're just a loser. It's ridiculous to say it. And at this moment, the group of people behind them saw that their boss was defeated by Lin Yu. At this moment, they felt a little panic in their hearts, so they subconsciously moved towards the back. Took a few steps back so suddenly. They backed away from Lin Yu and then moved forward. At this time, Lin Yu was like the big boy next door. He was generally harmless to humans and animals. He had a smile on his face and looked non-aggressive. But in fact, only he himself knows how scary this guy is. The group of people just looked at each other in confusion. In the end, they gritted their teeth, and then suddenly they jumped up, waved the long sword in their hands, and then suddenly moved towards Lin Yu's body. The front door was slashed so directly. The strange beasts in these guys were all released almost at the same time. It's just that the beasts of these guys are at the lord level of Qing Yashui, and there are even a few high-level beasts mixed in, but there are no more others. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu's lips curled up into a slightly evil smile, a hint of mockery flashed through his eyes, and then he shook his head. Interesting, it's really interesting. I thought you might have some skills, but now it seems like you are just like this, which is very disappointing. Lin Yu just spoke in a leisurely manner, and at this time, the smile on his face became more and more obvious. At this moment, Scar's clenched fists clacked. "Asshole, stop showing off your superiority here. If I want to, I will definitely beat you to your knees and beg for mercy in a while. I just hope you don't cry. The nose is good." At this time, after Scar finished speaking, he rushed straight towards Lin Yu without saying a word. His speed was extremely strange, and he was already in front of Lin Yu in just a blink of an eye. With the lesson learned from the previous time, Scar did not dare to be too presumptuous this time, but even so, to Lin Yu, Scar's appearance was quite ridiculous. Lin Yu just shook his head, and then sighed quietly. "Hey, why do you think you have to do it? Why do you have to humiliate yourself like this?" Of course Scar didn't believe what Lin Yu said, so at this time he naturally didn't take Lin Yu seriously at all. He just glared at Lin Yu fiercely, with a flash in his eyes. A bit of coldness. "Boy, stop pretending to be weird with me here. Who do you think you are?" At this time, Scar had already arrived in front of Lin Yu. He raised the knife above his head with both hands and pointed it at Lin Yu's head, chopping down the Huashan mountain with force. At this time, Lin Yu did not dodge, but suddenly opened his eyes, and then a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "You extremely ridiculous and extremely stupid guy, tremble, tremble." After Lin Yu finished speaking, a space-time barrier suddenly appeared in front of him, which directly blocked those people from leaving. Those people saw that they were about to chop Lin Yu, but at this moment, an invisible barrier directly blocked them. Those people's eyes were full of disbelief. At this moment, they suddenly had a few more ominous premonitions in their hearts. At this moment, they wanted to escape, but Lin Yu naturally could not let them continue to harm people. Lin Yu just had a thought, and then the space began to stir suddenly, and these people suddenly exploded into a ball of blood mist. And at this moment, the woman saw Lin Yu, like a god descending from the sky, and the whole person was instantly completely convinced by Lin Yu's actions. The woman's eyes were full of surprise and disbelief. She didn't dare to believe that what she saw was actually true. At this time, Lin Yu just slowly walked in front of the woman. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 443. At this time, Lin Yu saw the woman who was stunned on the spot, and just asked so gently, "Are you okay?" After hearing Lin Yu's voice, the woman came back to her senses instantly, and then shook her head. It's okay, it's okay." At this time, the woman seemed to be stunned, her eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of surprise, and at this moment, Lin Yu also suddenly smiled, with a smile on his face. Nailed on the woman's body. "Can you leave now?" At this time, Lin Yu, in the woman's eyes, was like a ray of light shining into her heart in the darkness. Generally, the woman's eyes were fixed directly on Lin Yu, with the corners of her eyes and eyebrows it is full of tenderness. After seeing the woman like this, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with something strange. Then he shook his head and smiled. Is there something on my face? The woman came back to her senses in an instant. At this time, the woman also shook her head quickly. No, of course not, forgive me for my gaffe just now. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled softly, and then walked up to the woman. I wonder if you can help me lead the way in a while. The woman was naturally very happy after hearing what Lin Yu said, so she nodded lightly. "Where do you want to go, sir?" This woman was extremely beautiful, but she didn't look like she was born at all. After Lin Yu heard what the woman said, he was slightly stunned at first, but after a while he sighed quietly. "Well, to be honest, I don't even know where I want to go. Maybe it's my home all over the world, maybe." After the woman heard what Lin Yu said, she couldn't help but smile. "I didn't expect that, sir is really humorous." After Lin Yu heard what the woman said, he turned his head and glanced at the woman. "Is it humorous? Maybe, but no one has said that about me for a long time." The two people just looked at each other and smiled. The night in this desert is very cold. The woman's clothes are thin, but for some reason, she doesn't feel cold at all when looking at her. At this time, Lin Yu turned around and glanced at the woman. "It's extremely cold in the desert, and you are a prostitute. If you fall into the hands of this bandit, the consequences will be unimaginable, but why do you want to choose to come to this desert?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the woman, and there was quite a bit of curiosity in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, after the woman heard what Lin Yu said, she was also slightly stunned. After a moment, her eyes dimmed sadly, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "If you can, I don't want to do this either, but some things are not as simple as you think." The woman just sighed quietly, with a bitter smile on the corner of her mouth, and a look of helplessness quietly soaked in the corners of her eyes and brows. At this time, Lin Yu was also stunned after hearing what the woman said. "It seems that you are a person with a story. If you don't mind, how about telling me your story?" Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the woman, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed in his eyes. After the woman heard Lin Yu say this, she was slightly startled, and then a flash of memories flashed across her face. At this time, she opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something. "What?" But when the words came to her lips, she swallowed them back. The woman smiled quickly, and then waved her hand. "There are some things that can't be said, so let's leave it for now." After Lin Yu saw the woman like this, he no longer had the heart to force her. At this time, Lin Yu just patted the woman's shoulder gently, with a somewhat complicated meaning in his words. "It doesn't matter, if you don't want to say it, you don't have to say it." Lin Yu stared at the woman with a smile on his face, and at this moment, a wolf howl suddenly woke them both up. The woman suddenly rushed into Lin Yu's arms, and she hid shivering in Lin Yu's arms. There was an indescribable fear in the corners of his eyes and brows. After Lin Yu saw this scene, there was quite a bit of doting in his eyes. At this time, he gently rubbed the woman's little head. "It's okay, these guys don't dare to come over. Even if they dare to come over, you don't need to be afraid when I'm here." For some reason, the woman at this time felt an unprecedented sense of security in Lin Yu's arms. The woman at this time nodded gently. "Okay, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid." The woman's voice was trembling slightly. At this time, Lin Yu smiled softly. "Silly girl, looking at you like this, it doesn't look like you're not afraid." And at this moment, an ugly-looking monster stretched out a hand from the sand dunes. This guy looked like a human, but his skin showed a faint blue color and there were scales on his body. With a pair of crystal-clear wings on its back. The monsters crawled out slowly and approached the two of them. The speed of those monsters was not slow. In just a moment, they had already arrived in front of the two of them. The howling sounds of these monsters were like wolves. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he could roughly guess that it was the howling of these monsters just now, which made him mistakenly think that these guys were wolves. At this time, Lin Yu just like that, he half closed his eyes, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting, it's really interesting." Lin Yu's body was filled with murderous intent. At this moment, he looked around. At this moment, the woman lay firmly in Lin Yu's arms. Can you run away? If not, the two of us can run away separately. The woman's voice trembled slightly, and her voice was full of fear. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chang. Chapter 444. At this time, after hearing what the woman said, Lin Yu's mouth corners also raised a few faint smiles. He turned his head and looked at the woman. Silly girl, what are you thinking? How could I leave you alone and run away? Lin Yu just doted on the woman's head so gently. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the woman's face was slightly condensed, and her voice even trembled slightly. Really, really not. At this moment, Lin Yu just smiled, of course not. Lin Yu took a rough look and found that most of these beasts were actually beasts at the level of domain masters. In fact, these beasts were not a problem for Lin Yu at all. It was even easier for him to deal with these beasts. At this moment, Lin Yu's mind moved, and then the earth-splitting bear suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. At this time, the earth-splitting bear let out an angry roar. When the strange beasts heard the roar, a sense of fear instantly spread in their hearts. The strange beasts felt a sense of fear, so they began to slowly retreat. But at this moment, a strange beast with a single horn on its head suddenly appeared in front of them. The strange beast just glanced coldly at Lin Yu and his friends, with a bit of gloom in his eyes. At this time, he heard an angry roar from his mouth, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu and his friends. At this moment, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu raised his head slowly and glanced coldly at the strange beast, with a bit of coldness in his eyes. The strange beast seemed to have discovered the horror of the human in front of it, so at this time, those strange beasts actually began to move backwards one after another, and slowly retreated. The woman at this moment was also stunned after seeing this scene. Of course, the woman did not think that she had completely retreated these desert gods, so at this time, the woman turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu, with a bit of complexity in her eyes. At this moment, the woman's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu, and her brows seemed to be twisted together. How is it possible? This man actually scared off all these desert gods by himself. How could this man be so scary? This is too unbelievable. When Lin Yu saw the woman like this, he couldn't help scratching his head and smiled. What's wrong? Is there any problem? When the woman heard what Lin Yu said, she shook her head. No, no problem, no problem. Lin Yu thought that the woman might be too scared, so she spoke incoherently. At this time, he didn't take these things to heart. He just smiled and didn't say anything more. At this time, the woman turned her head and looked at Lin Yu. There was a bit of complexity in the woman's eyes. Who are you? The woman's eyes stared straight at Lin Yu, and her eyes and eyebrows were full of confusion. Lin Yu was also slightly stunned at first, and after a moment, he suddenly smiled. Guess what? The woman shook her head. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to remember that he and the woman had been together for such a long time, but he didn't seem to know the woman's name, so he turned his head and looked at the woman. By the way, what's your name? After hearing what Lin Yu said, the woman was also slightly stunned at first, and then she smiled. My name is Evelyn. What about you? Lin Yu nodded. My name is Lin Yu. After scaring off the strange beasts, Lin Yu and Evelyn roasted a fire in the desert with peace of mind. The moonlight above the desert shone on Evelyn's face. It was Evelyn, which added a bit of charm. After seeing the scene at this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but feel a little ripple in his heart. Evelyn saw Lin Yu's eyes, and from time to time she would glance at her, and she was secretly happy in her heart. Evelyn turned her head and looked at Lin Yu at this moment. I have a question, I wonder if I can ask you. After hearing Evelyn's words, Lin Yu nodded gently and smiled. Of course, no problem, just ask any questions you have, I will tell you everything I know. Evelyn heard Lin Yu say this, and then she laughed again. It's not a big deal, but a strong man like you, under normal circumstances, should not get lost in this desert. How did you get lost in this desert? In fact, Lin Yu was not lost, because he didn't know the road at all, but at this time, Lin Yu couldn't tell the girl that he didn't know the road at all, so he could only scratch his head and laugh. Laugh. Maybe it's because my natural sense of direction is weak. I don't know the specific reason. Anyway, I got lost in the end. Then you got separated from your team. Lin Yu continued to shake his head. That's not true, because I came out alone, and there is no team at all. Evelyn nodded slightly, as if he had suddenly realized something. At this time, Lin Yu also smiled helplessly, but he didn't say anything more. The topic between the two seemed to have disappeared. The two of them really didn't know what to say. Say something. After waiting for a while, Evelyn seemed to suddenly remember something. Well, by the way, you haven't told me which city you want to go to. Evelyn's beautiful eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu shook his head in the same way after being stunned for a while. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chang. Chapter 445. At this time, Evelyn was completely stunned. She half closed her eyes and glanced in Lin Yu's direction, with quite a bit of vigilance in her eyes. You don't even know where you're going. It was obvious from Evelyn's tone that she was a little suspicious of Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu also had a bit of a wry smile on his lips, and in the corners of his eyes and brows, there was a sense of helplessness. Yes, I really don't even know where I want to go yet. A definite goal. My main purpose of going out this time is to experience myself, nothing more. Evelyn had heard of those aloof strong men who felt that their strength was somewhat insufficient, so they carried their own weapons and went out to travel and hone their strength. At this time, Evelyn just nodded and smiled. I didn't expect you to be such a master. Evelyn's eyes looked at Lin Yu, filled with admiration. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled. At this moment, he was thinking, of course I am not traveling. I just want to quickly find out where the temple is and get something from the ruins. But although Lin Yu thought so, he definitely couldn't say that. At this moment, countless desert gods knelt down in front of the desert god king. The eyes of these desert gods were full of respect. In fact, the reason why people named these strange beasts desert gods is very simple, because in this desert, in the sand, there are countless desert gods. These desert gods are like fish in water in this desert, and they can hide in this desert. In the desert, they move forward secretly, and their claws are full of poison. Although these desert gods are only at the level of domain lords, these desert gods can even fight against epic-level beasts, especially the kind of neurotoxin in their bodies. If injected into it even in the body of an epic-level alien beast, being able to completely kill that alien beast is simply extremely terrifying. Even in the human race, there are countless strong men who want to destroy these desert gods, but they have taken action many times, but in the end they can only come back so dejected. This is naturally a headache. The desert god king just glanced coldly at these desert gods, and then slowly withdrew his gaze after a moment, with a gloomy murderous intent in the corners of his eyes and brows. Trash, you bunch of trash, what use do I have for you? There is no way to deal with even a mere human being in this desert, in the field we are best at, so what use do you think you have? After hearing what the desert god king said, these desert gods lowered their heads, with a sense of helplessness in the corners of their eyes and brows. After a while, the desert god king also sighed quietly. Well, no matter what, this human race is indeed a little different. When the two of us looked at each other from a distance, I actually felt the terrifying murderous intention on his body. This really made me feel a little bit unexpected. After the desert god king said this, there was a rather solemn look in his eyes, and finally his brows seemed to be knitted together. And at this moment, a man wearing a black robe suddenly appeared in front of the Desert God King. The man's eyes were staring directly at the Desert God King, and the corners of his mouth were even more, it evoked a bit of a faint smile. After the Desert God King saw the man, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and then a gloomy look flashed in his eyes. "Why is it you?" After the man heard what the Desert God King said, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. He just glanced at the Desert God King coldly. "It's interesting. It's really interesting." According to legend, this majestic Desert God King is actually afraid of a ridiculous human being, and he is the kind of human being you despise the most. Don't you think this is ridiculous? At this time, after the Desert God King heard what the man said, he turned his head towards the man, and just glanced coldly, with a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes, and the murderous look on his body. The meaning is even more awe-inspiring. "Boy, I hate what you are saying now. I want to warn you today. If you dare to act like this again, I will personally chew every bone in your body." The eyes of the Desert God King were staring straight at the man, with a cold murderous intent in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, after hearing what the Desert God King said, the man just laughed out loud. There was a look of madness in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, his whole person was even more like crazy. Same. After waiting for a while, the cold aura of the Desert God King dispersed without reservation, and a mysterious aura emitted from his body. At this time, the smile at the corner of the Desert God King's mouth began to become more and more obvious, and there was a rather gloomy look in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. "Little guy, very good, very good. I admire your courage very much, but if you have such courage, you should also see what kind of talent is opposite you." At this moment, the black-robed man showed his aura without reservation, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of gloom. After waiting for this moment, the black-robed man suddenly flashed out, and in just a moment, he had already arrived in front of the Desert God King. At this time, the Desert God King had no time to defend himself, and was directly grabbed by the neck by the black-robed man, and then pulled up slowly by the neck. The Desert God King's eyes and eyebrows were full of disbelief. He didn't dare to believe that what he had experienced was actually true. The sneer at the corners of the black-robed man's mouth began to become more and more obvious. His eyes were fixed on the Desert God King, and there was a bit of mockery in his eyes and eyebrows. "How is it? This taste is not bad, the pleasure of suffocation, but I don't know how much you can enjoy it," the black-robed man said slowly. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 446. At this moment, the Desert God King saw the rage in the man's eyes. After seeing this scene, the Desert God King's pupils suddenly enlarged, and there was a sense of fear in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. I was wrong, please let me go." After hearing what the Desert God King said, the man laughed out loud. At this time, she seemed to have become a complete lunatic, and there was a sense of madness in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows. The man slowly walked in front of the Desert God King, and then he exerted a little force in his palm. After the Desert God King felt the force coming from his neck, there was a sense of fear in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, he realized that he had provoked an existence that should not be provoked. After seeing this scene, the fear on the face of the Desert God King began to become more and more obvious. I was wrong, please let me go, I am willing to recognize you as my master." The black-robed man suddenly laughed at this time. "Are you serious?" The Desert God King heard this at this time, and after the black-robed man said this, a little light flashed in his eyes. After all, compared to his own life, it is acceptable to surrender to others and recognize others as his master. So at this time, after hearing what the black-robed man said, the desert god king nodded heavily, and a strange color flashed in his eyes and eyebrows. The black-robed man turned his head at this time and glanced coldly at the desert god king, with a faint smile on his lips, and a mocking look in his eyes and eyebrows. You have to think clearly. Once you recognize me as your master, you will have no way out in the future. If you dare to betray me, you will have to pay a price. I don't need to say more. You should understand it. At this time, the black-robed man's eyes and eyebrows were full of gloom, and the terrifying aura on his body was revealed at this time. The space around him seemed to be boiling, and it began to tremble slowly. The desert god king had never seen such a terrifying pressure. After seeing this scene, the desert god king couldn't help but swallowed his saliva, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of fear. At this moment, he nodded quickly. I understand, I understand. If I recognize you as my master in the future, I will never be indecisive, let alone have any unreasonable thoughts. Please spare me. At this moment, the black-robed man couldn't help laughing after hearing what the desert god king said, with a playful look in his eyes and eyebrows. Ha ha ha, good, good, that's the best. Remember what you said. If you really dare to have any unreasonable thoughts at that time, don't blame me for not thinking of our old friendship and being rude to you. After the black-robed man finished speaking, a drop of blood essence suddenly flew out, and then that drop of blood essence rushed directly towards the desert god king. In just a moment, it had already arrived at the center of the desert god king's eyebrows, and then this drop of blood essence directly drilled into the center of the desert god king's eyebrows and disappeared. At this time, the black-robed man seemed to be able to feel the slightly terrifying strength of the desert god king. At this time, the black-robed man suddenly smiled, and a bit of playfulness flashed between his eyebrows, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, the desert god king let out a low roar, and his eyes were full of a painful look. At this moment, the momentum and murderous intent on the desert god king began to emerge quietly. After waiting for a long time, a mysterious breath suddenly flew out, and then a sinister aura suddenly emerged between the surrounding heaven and earth. At this moment, Lin Yu and Evelyn were originally roasting a fire, but at this moment, they suddenly felt the terrifying momentum, and Lin Yu's face suddenly became ugly. At this time, his eyes flashed a bit of solemnity. Lin Yu's expression suddenly condensed, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of surprise. In just a moment, the overwhelming murderous intent gradually began to spread. Sand and rocks flew between heaven and earth, and the surroundings were also dark. Lin Yu turned his head and looked at Evelyn. A bit of solemnity flashed in his eyes. At this time, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly, and a bit of bitter smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. What should I do now? At this moment, Lin Yu's eyes and eyebrows were full of helplessness, and just after this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something, his face suddenly froze, and then he jumped up directly. Lin Yu flew straight to the right front of him. His speed was so fast that he came to the front of a desert god in just a moment. At this time, he grabbed the desert god and threw him heavily to the ground. The desert god let out a painful roar, and there was a sense of fear in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Lin Yu slowly approached the desert god, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, the desert god kept retreating backwards, and his eyes were full of fear when he looked at Lin Yu. You, stay away from me. At this time, Lin Yu was also a little unexpected, probably because the desert god actually spoke like this. Lin Yu just turned his head and glanced coldly towards the god of desert. There was a cold light in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and the murderous intent on his body was even more awe-inspiring. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 447. After Evelyn on the side saw this scene, the corners of her eyes and brows were filled with a look of complete disbelief. At this moment, Evelyn seemed to be stunned. She could not understand what was happening in front of her at all. Why is this man so terrifying? But at this time, the thoughts in Evelyn's heart began to become more and more determined. After the desert god saw Lin Yu at this moment, he subconsciously retreated towards the back. Give you a chance to explain your reasons for coming. If I'm in a good mood, I might be able to let you go. If I'm in a bad mood, don't blame me for being rude to you. At this moment, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the god of the desert nodded his head as if a chicken was pecking at rice. His eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of fear. At this moment, Lin Yu in his heart, he was like the god of death from hell. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. There was a hint of ridicule in his eyes, and his face was slightly condensed. Looking at you, looking at me so scared, can I really, is it so terrifying? Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the desert god nodded subconsciously, but then quickly shook his head. A slight sneer appeared at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth. I'm too lazy to talk to you, so much nonsense. Let me ask you, what are you doing with such a large-scale gathering? The god of the desert heard what Lin Yu said, and before he had time to speak, a person's voice came from a distance. Do you even need to ask? Of course I want to take your life. A person slowly walked over from a distance. After Lin Yu heard the sound, he followed the sound and saw a desert god king slowly walking towards him. The desert god, the speed of the god king is not fast, but every step he takes is sonorous and powerful. After Lin Yu heard what the desert god king said, a slight sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. There was a hint of ridicule in his eyes, and his brows seemed to be knitted together. As if, a gloomy look flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows. What do you mean? Lin Yu's words were quite cold, and the murderous aura in him became more and more obvious at this moment. The desert god king felt the aura in Lin Yu's body at this moment. With such a terrifying killing intention, I suddenly had a somewhat ominous premonition in my heart. That's just what it means. The desert god king was talking unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this moment, Lin Yu's face showed a cold light, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were completely filled with emotion. It's a gloomy color. At this time, he let out an angry roar, and then suddenly rushed towards the desert god king. Lin Yu's speed was extremely fast. In just a blink of an eye, he had already arrived in front of the desert god king. At this time, he rounded his fist and was about to hit the desert god king so hard. But at this time he hit nothing. At this time, Lin Yu secretly screamed something bad. At this time, he subconsciously turned sideways suddenly towards the back, and then a sharp claw grazed him like this, and his face drifted away like this. The desert god king never expected that Lin Yu's reaction would be so alert. At this moment, the desert god king half squinted his eyes, and a strange color flashed in the corners of his eyes and brows. There was even a bit of a joking smile on the corner of his mouth. Interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect your reaction to be very slow, but so what? Today I said I want you to die, but you won't be able to survive. The desert god king said in a calm and cold voice, and then suddenly jumped up and stormed towards Lin Yu again. Every move of the desert god king was almost aimed at Lin Yu's vital points. When Lin Yu saw this scene, his expression was slightly condensed, and there was quite a bit of excitement in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. The meaning of solemnity. This guy's speed is a bit too fast. How is that possible? Lin Yu just half squinted his eyes, with a rather dignified look in his eyes. At this time, the desert god king's eyes were staring directly at Lin Yu. His brows condensed slightly, and then a strange color flashed in his eyes. This little guy's speed and reaction are both good, but if this continues, it will be really difficult to kill him. No, we have to find a way. When the desert god king thought of this, he suddenly jumped up without saying a word and hit Lin Yu hard. At this moment, the desert god king had already arrived in front of Lin Yu with just one breath. At this time, Lin Yu just turned slightly to the side, and then immediately avoided the desert god Wang's head-on blow. Then he turned around and grabbed the desert god king's wrist. But at this moment, countless desert gods came towards him like this crazily, and Evelyn also fed several desert gods around her. For a moment, Lin Yu could be regarded as falling into this desperate situation, and at this moment, a pair of eyes in the dark stared directly at Lin Yu, and the corners of the man's mouth curled up. There was a hint of a faint smile, and a hint of mockery flashed through his eyes. "Little guy, today I want to see how capable you are and how you can deal with so many desert gods. Now that they are under my control, they are not afraid of death. Today is your day of death." The smile on the corner of the desert god's mouth became more and more obvious as he spoke. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the many desert gods getting closer and closer to him. At this time, his mind moved, and then the earth-splitting bear appeared in front of everyone out of thin air. The earth-shattering bear landed heavily on the ground, and then smashed the ground with both fists. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 448. After the man in black robe saw this scene, his expression was slightly condensed, and a bit of solemnity flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows. At this moment, he half squinted his eyes, and the corners of his mouth were even more raised. A bit of a sneer. "Interesting, it's really interesting." There was a bit of gloominess in the eyes of the man in black robe, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, Lin Yu didn't know why, but he always felt as if there was a pair of eyes staring directly at him from behind him. Lin Yu's expression also condensed slightly, and then he couldn't help but shook his head slightly. No, it's just too weird. Why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like this?" Lin Yu just murmured in a low voice. A strange color flashed in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then his brows seemed to be knitted together. But at this moment, the man in black robe suddenly rushed up. The man in black robe was extremely fast. In just a moment, he came directly in front of Lin Yu. At this moment, when Lin Yu saw the man in black robe speeding towards him in the distance, his expression was suddenly startled, and then he subconsciously turned sideways to avoid the man in black robe's head-on attack. At this time, during the fight between the Desert God King and Lin Yu, the few hits he received from Lin Yu seemed to be understated, but they left countless dark energy in his body. Those dark energies were hidden in his body, causing him to feel a sharp pain even if he moved slightly. Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the man in black robes. The faint smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of excitement in his eyes. A mocking look. "Looks like you still can't sit still." Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, the smile at the corner of his mouth becoming more and more obvious, and his eyes full of mockery. The man in black robe saw that Lin Yu's aura was so calm at this time and knew that it would be difficult to kill this boy today. So at this time, the man in black robe suddenly smiled, a bit of gloom flashed in his eyes, and there was a kind of coldness between his eyebrows. "Interesting, it's really interesting. I didn't expect that you kid would dare to plot against me. This is really something I didn't expect." After Lin Yu heard what the man in black robe said, he couldn't help laughing at that time. "Ha ha ha, each other, you have been staying in the dark, I am not even sure whether you exist, so I always have to give you some opportunities to think that you can kill me and show yourself." Lin Yu just spoke in a cold and unhurried voice. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the man in black robe also had a somewhat solemn look in his eyes, and he just nodded lightly. "Yes, you have some ability. There are very few people who dare to plot against me like this, but you are one. You saw me today. It is also the first official meeting between the two of us. We will meet again in the future. Goodbye. After the man in black robe finished speaking, he immediately turned around and left. At this time, Lin Yu wanted to chase the man in black robe, but was suddenly blocked by the Desert God King. The Desert God King's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body, and the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a cold murderous intent. Boy, if you want to chase my master, you must first pass me. At this moment, the corner of Lin Yu's mouth suddenly evoked a sneer, and his face was filled with a cold look. Okay, since you want to seek death yourself, then you can't blame me. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly rushed away. His speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, he had already arrived in front of the Desert God King, and then he rushed directly like this. He rounded his arms and hit the Desert God King hard. At this time, the Desert God King only felt a surge of energy in his chest, and then his whole body suddenly retreated back one after another. After waiting for this moment, the Desert God King spurted out a mouthful of blood. At this time, Lady Bear seemed to have started to fire at Lin Yu's signal. He had a Desert God King in each hand, and then immediately afterwards, there was such a heavy collision in the middle, and then the Desert God King's brain exploded in an instant. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to feel that this was still a little too slow, so at this time, he thought, and the space-time beast suddenly appeared on the desert. After the space-time beast appeared, Lin Yu only felt that there was something in his dantian. Most of the spiritual energy that was finally saved in the soil was drained out in an instant. A bitter smile appeared at the corners of Lin Yu's lips, and there was a look of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then he shook his head. Oh, they are still limited by spiritual power. If there were no such limitation of spiritual power, these guys would be able to kill them all in an instant. When Lin Yu thought of this, his brows seemed to be knitted together, and there was a complete sense of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. And just a moment later, Lin Yu's mind moved, and the space beast instantly used the space beast to tear the countless desert gods around. In just one breath, they were all instantly crushed by the void. The blue blood almost dyed the entire desert blue. And at this moment, the Desert God King saw that the situation was over, and at this time, the Desert God King subconsciously wanted to escape, so he begged the black-robed man, but at this time, the black-robed man just sneered. Since you are such a waste, there is no point in keeping you here. So many of your brothers have died, you might as well die with them. The Desert God King heard it, and after the black-robed man said this, he was also surprised, and at this moment he let out an angry roar, "You bastard, why do you treat me like this? Don't." Before the Desert God King finished speaking, he had already rushed towards Lin Yu. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 449. At this time, Lin Yu saw that the Desert God King was not retreating, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. At this time, most of his spiritual power had been consumed. At this time, he felt deep in his heart. Suddenly, I felt a bit of an ominous premonition. Oops. As soon as Lin Yu finished speaking, he saw the Desert God King arriving 3 feet in front of Lin Yu. Then Lin Yu heard a violent noise, and then the Desert God King Yan directly after disappearing into the vast desert. A powerful force directly lifted Lin Yu away. Lin Yu forcibly stabilized his body, quickly picked up Evelyn, and the two of them swept away in the distance. At this time, in a small town, a group of people dressed in mourning clothes were beating gongs and drums. A young man came to this family's house with a piece of dogtail grass in his mouth. The young man looked around and then shook his head. Alas, such a good family hired such a rubbish celestial master. After the guard saw the young man, he just waved casually, "Mr. Zhang is going to have a funeral today. Get away as far as you want, don't be an eyesore to us here." At this moment, after the young man heard what the guard said, the corner of his mouth turned into a sneer, "Really? This is what you said, don't cry and beg me to come back later." After hearing what the young man said, the guards just laughed like this, with a look of ridicule in the corners of their eyes and brows. "Please come back. Stop joking here and get out." And at this moment, it sounded like the coffin was about to be carried and buried. Su Yang secretly shouted, "Bad, you know, even if the coffin has not been carried for burial, the situation has already become like this. If it is true that the coffin is carried for burial, then the corpse may turn into a corpse in a while. But looking at Mr. Zhang's appearance now, I'm afraid that even if he goes out, Mr. Zhang may not take his words seriously." After Su Yang thought of this, he just sighed quietly. "Oh, no matter what, being kind to others and exorcising ghosts and subjugating demons is what we should do." After Su Yang thought of this, he quietly followed the funeral procession. There was banging and banging along the way, and the sound of mourning and music sounded in the middle of the night, making the people around them feel uneasy. The people around him could only curse secretly in the house, but the Zhang family was usually very powerful, so they did not dare to provoke the Zhang family at all. And at this time, when they came to the entrance of the town, a man in shabby clothes who looked like a beggar blocked their way. "Young boys, you can't be like this, you can't be like this." At this time, young Master Zhang took a step forward. "This old man, please don't waste our time. Please leave quickly and take the money to buy something to eat." The old beggar took the bank notes, but had no intention of leaving. "Young man, since you gave me money, I can't leave." At this time, Mr. Zhang also became anxious and took a sudden step forward. "I told you, old man, don't refuse to drink the toast, you will be fined with wine." The young master of the Zhang family called some strong men, and those strong men put the old beggar aside. After seeing this scene, the old beggar just shook his head crazily from the side. "Oh, the weather is dry and things are dry, be careful of ghosts and gods, it is difficult to walk at night, I am afraid that this is the road leading to the hall of hell." At this time, the Zhang family master refused to listen at all, and at this time, Zhao Tianqi also had a displeased look on his face. The group of people continued to knock, but everyone was a little confused because it was midnight now, but there were actually a lot of people coming and going. Their eyes were dull, and they had never seen these people before. After seeing this scene, young Master Zhang was slightly confused. There shouldn't be so many people on this path during the day. You must know that this path leads to the cemetery. When young Master Zhang thought of this, a layer of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. At this moment, he quickly looked at everyone's clothes. It doesn't matter if you don't look at it. When you look at it, your face becomes bright and suddenly turns pale. It turns out that the clothes these people are wearing are all shrouds. Young Master Zhang quickly pulled the sleeve of Master Zhao Tianqi next to him. Tianqi Zhao, look at these people, are they a little abnormal?" At this time, Zhao Tianqi was so frightened that his legs were weak, but at this moment he cheered up and turned his head to look at Mr. Zhang. "Calm down, don't talk nonsense, keep moving forward, pretend not to know. If you want to make a lot of money, if you can't bear this grievance, then what's the point of making a lot of money?" At this time, young Master Zhang also nodded slightly after hearing what Zhao Tianqi said. And just a moment later, the people carrying the coffin were half kneeling on the ground. At this time, the veins on their foreheads popped out. They wanted to get up, but they couldn't get up no matter what. But what they never expected was that these pedestrians seemed to be unable to see anything strange on their side, and they all went on their own way. At this moment, Su Yang followed behind them. He looked at the narrow paths around him and the pines and cypresses all over the mountains. Alas, This damn guy, these people from the Zhao family are afraid of getting into trouble this time. Su Yang drew a hexagram, which was Kun, but when Su Yang saw this hexagram, he knew that today's matter was probably unsolvable. The earth is Kun, and a gentleman carries things with great virtue. As the saying goes, a gentleman loves money and gets it in a proper way, but what the Zhang family has done over the years is really not like what a gentleman does, so I'm afraid they will suffer some disasters and lose money to avoid disasters. When Su Yang thought of this, he pinched his fingers and quickly calculated. And at this moment, Su Yang heard a scream. The knees of the people carrying the coffin were all broken, as if they were pressed down by 1,000 jin weight. The shoulders of the strong men carrying the coffin were bleeding, and they looked very scary. After seeing this scene, the people who were attending the funeral could no longer hold back and started screaming. The scream was very sharp and it did not sound like a human scream at all. Instead, it sounded like a ghost scream. Everyone felt a chill in their hearts. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 450. At this time, the passers-by, after seeing them, their dull eyes suddenly glowed with a blood-red light. The passers-by looked at them as if they were looking at fat sheep, and slowly they were heading towards them and surrounded them. It wasn't over yet. At this moment, I saw the coffin lid. It flew so high all of a sudden, and finally it was stuck straight on the ground, and it was stuck straight. Old Mrs. Zhang slowly put on the shroud from the coffin and climbed up. At this time, old Mrs. Zhang had disheveled hair. At this time, those timid people were frightened and fainted after seeing this scene. For these little ghosts, so much yang energy is simply a great supplement. The ghosts slowly walked towards these people. There was chaos on the field instantly. Mr. Zhang quickly took Zhao Tianqi's hand, his voice trembling slightly. Tianqi Zhao, what do you think we should do next? What do you think we should do next? Mr. Zhang's words were a bit incoherent. Zhao Tianqi was so frightened that his legs were paralyzed, and he was stammering and speechless for a moment. Don't be anxious, don't panic, I have a way, look at my ancestral peachwood sword, look at my ancestral peachwood sword. At this time, Zhang Tianqi just picked up the peachwood sword in his hand, as if he was suffering from epilepsy. He was twisting and dancing in one place so randomly, which looked a bit ridiculous. At this time, Su Yang couldn't help laughing from behind, and burst into laughter. After everyone heard Su Yang's laughter, they all looked towards Su Yang. Asshole, why are you laughing? Su Yang heard it, and after Zhao Tianqi said this, his eyes were full of mockery. I can't laugh when you do such a shameful thing. Is the peachwood sword in your hand a real peachwood sword? Zhao Tianqi was just a charlatan, and he bought the peachwood sword in exchange for it himself, but it was absolutely impossible for him to admit this to himself. How not? Su Yang shook his head. It is true that peach trees have spiritual powers. It is true that they can ward off evil spirits and provide refuge. However, only the peachwood sword made from the southeast branch of this tree has such effects. All because of the peachwood swords made from the southeast branches. There are two gods at the bottom of Dedu Mountain, named Dragon on the left and Chien on the right. They hold reed ropes and are responsible for killing ominous ghosts. Therefore, only the peach trees in the southeast have the effect of driving away disasters and avoiding evil. In your hands, this mahogany sword is no different from an ordinary toy. At this moment, after Tianqi Zhao heard what Su Yang said, his face turned pale for a while. When the young master of the Zhang family saw Su Yang's appearance, he seemed to have seen a savior. Listen to what the young master said, is there anything you can do? At this time, Su Yang looked at the fierce ghosts around him, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he shook his head. I can only say that I am brave enough to give it a try. As for whether I can if it doesn't succeed, I can't say for sure. Zhao Tianqi's eyes were full of contempt and disdain. He just glanced coldly towards Su Yang, with a bit of gloom in his eyes. I thought you could be so capable, but it turns out you're just a charlatan and a charlatan. This clay bodhisattva still has a third degree of fire energy, not to mention that Su Yang is still a human being. At this time, Su Yang just turned his head and glared coldly at Zhao Tianqi, with a cold light on his face. When Zhao Tianqi saw Su Yang, his eyes were so sharp that he had already reached his lips, and he swallowed back all the sarcastic words at this moment. At this moment, countless fierce ghosts swooped towards them. After Lin Yu experienced the self-exposure of the Desert God King, he held Evelyn and the two of them for a long time before escaping from the scope of the explosion. Lin Yu was like this at this time, panting heavily, with a sense of panic in the corners of his eyes and brows. Even now, he still looked frightened. After seeing this scene, Evelyn only felt that the man in front of her seemed to be someone she could trust. After all, even at that critical moment, this man still wanted to carry her out. At this time, Lin Yu glanced at Evelyn, and then slowly put her down. A hint of concern flashed in his eyes. Are you okay? At this time, Evelyn just shook her head. At this moment, Evelyn pointed in front of them. It's a small town. At this time, after Lin Yu heard Evelyn say this, he looked in the direction of Evelyn's finger, and his expression was also slightly happy at that time. Great, I'll enter this small town soon, and I'll be able to ask for directions. At this moment, they heard an unusual noise in the distance. At this time, Lin Yu and Evelyn were sneaking towards the noise. When they came to the noise, Lin Yu saw a creature with countless tentacles beside them. The monster with countless threads protruding from its tentacles seemed to be pulling a shadow puppet show, affecting the group of people below. These people just killed each other and fought in a group. Exotic Beast, Desert Fantasy Beast Epic Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 9999999999777. Speed, 9999999999777. Defense, 9999999999777. Attack, 9999999999777. Skill, Control. Control, Desert Fantasy Beast activates skills, uses its tentacles to release countless silk threads, used to achieve the purpose of controlling others, but can only control those people or exotic beasts with lower cultivation than itself. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this desert fantasy beast, a few points of surprise flashed in his eyes. At this time, his eyebrows seemed to be twisted together, and his eyes and eyebrows were full of confusion. At this moment, after Evelyn saw this scene, her whole face began to become ugly. This strange beast actually controls everyone in this town. Look at its tentacles, they are connected to every person in this town.